Almost there. Chapter 4. Tiana. As she traveled along the cobblestone sidewalk on her way to the St. Claude Avenue streetcar stop, Tiana's spirit was invigorated by the charge that suffused the hazy air. It was rich and vibrant and teeming with the unmistakable energy of Mardi Gras. There was something about that time of the year that grabbed hold of the city and wouldn't let go. Even though the big day was still several days away, the festivities leading up to Fat Tuesday had already begun. Elaborate balls with men dressed in tuxedos and women in magnificent ball gowns would be held nightly at all the fancy hotels downtown. There would be plenty more gatherings for those who weren't lucky enough to attend the balls, whether small house parties or live music venues. On Saturday, there'd be the annual neighborhood picnic in Congo Square, not too far from her restaurant, and then gatherings to commemorate Shrove Monday. As tempting as it was to get caught up in all the Mardi Gras revelry, Tiana was more interested in using the citywide celebration to bring attention to T&J's supper club. She'd kick things off later that evening with live music and a special menu, and the next day they'd have a special guest for entertainment to draw more folks in. Excitement coursed through her veins like the electricity zipping through those newly installed wires overhead. She mentally ran through the new dishes for that evening, including the new jambalaya, which would be daringly made with pasta instead of traditional rice. It was a risk to take such a drastic change to one of New Orleans' most beloved dishes, but if she managed to pull this off at T&J's, would be the talk of the town. She wouldn't be surprised if people come in from as far as Biloxi, or even Jackson, Mississippi to try her new recipe. She hoped Mr. Slavaggio had delivered her order of spaghetti. His small macaroni factory in the French Quarter made the best pasta in the city. And more important, Mr. Slavaggio didn't mind bartering. A pound of pasta in exchange for a dozen of her beignets. Tiana stopped short. She whipped around, searching for the dark silhouette she was sure she'd seen out of the corner of her eye. Nothing. She did her best to shake off the eerie feeling that crept up in her spine. She was feeling foolish again. She was being foolish again. Or maybe she should pay a visit to that new doctor in Canal Street, whose sole focus was on eye diseases. There must be something on account for the strange shadows she's sensed slithering alongside her lately. Unless they had to do it with another doctor. Shivering slightly, Tiana continued toward the streetcar stop. A smile emerged as she came upon a welcome sight of Miss Marjorie Johnson sitting on the wooden bench. Miss Marjorie was known all throughout the Ninth Ward for her baked goods. Before the war, Daddy had often surprised them with one of Miss Marjorie's apple pies or sweet vanilla cakes as the grand finale to their Sunday dinner. After he was gone, she and Mama still ordered a cake from Miss Marjorie on each of their birthdays, including her father's. It had been one way to keep his memory alive. "Good morning, Miss Marjorie," Tiana greeted. "Well, hello, Tiana," the woman replied, her kind smile lighting up her face. Tiana took a seat on the bench and settled the bag with her vegetables in her lap. "You're looking mighty fine today," she said. "You on your way to the market for baking supplies?" The older woman's forehead furrowed. "Why, Tiana, I haven't made a baked good in years, not since my Edwin left for the war." Tiana's head flinched back slightly. But Miss Marjorie's son had gone around the same time her daddy had, and the older woman had received word that her son had become a casualty not long after Tiana and her mother received their similar devastating news. How could she claim that she hadn't baked anything in all those years when she's made Tiana's favorite caramel cake for her birthday last year? Miss Marjorie was not all that much older than her own mama, far too young to start losing her memory to old age. "Are you sure about that, Miss Marjorie?" Tiana asked cautiously. The woman nodded. "The last thing I baked was a batch of sweet rolls the morning Edwin left for the service. They were his favorite." She glanced at Tiana, a sad smile tilting up the corners of her mouth. "But I sure do miss the baking." An odd sensation prickled at the back of Tiana's mind. A week earlier, while Tiana was out shopping with her mother for materials for new curtains, Mr. Smith at the fabric shop had greeted them as if he hadn't seen them in ages. And then she'd had a similar encounter with the butcher, Mr. Phillips, when she'd visited his butcher shop a few days ago. Even though she's gone in just a week before, he prattled on about how things had happened years ago. "Maybe you should take it up again," Tiana told her. "I reckon there's a lot of people who want your sweets for their Mardi Gras parties." The streetcar rolled up to their stop, and Tiana helped Miss Marjorie up the steps. She paid her nickel fare and took a seat in the rear, grateful there was one open near the window. There was something magical about New Orleans when seen from the vantage point of a rolling streetcar, and the view distracted her from the odd encounter. Despite the thin haze that hung in the air, she could make out the colorful shotgun houses of her Ninth Ward neighborhood. The humble structure soon gave way to an array of storefronts along Rampart Street. From Dick's Barber Shop and King's Shoe Shine Parlor to Palmer Tailoring and Pelican Billard Hall, Tiana was fascinated by the hustle and bustle along the busy promenade. As the streetcar neared Ulysses Avenue, she reached above her head and tugged at the cable that hung just above the window, letting the driver know she wanted to get off at the next stop. The streetcar came to a halt, and the driver cranked the brass handle on the wheel lever as he opened the door for her. When she alighted from the streetcar, she spotted a familiar face. "Hello there, Miss Rose," Tiana greeted. She'd first encountered Miss Rose at her flower stand in the French market several months earlier, during one of her weekly trips to buy supplies for the restaurant. The woman seemed to have an innate ability to coax her flowers into producing the most stunning blooms. Even in the dead of winter, her stand abundant with vibrant sprays in every color under the sun. She called Tiana over the first day and offered her a bunch of fragrant lilacs, free of charge. The next time she visited, Miss Rose had added peonies to the bunch and surprised Tiana with a lovely painting of a courtyard like the one scattered throughout the French Quarter. Tiana tried to pay her, but Miss Rose refused to take her money, and she continued to give her gifts every time she visited. "Fancy seeing you outside of French Market," Tiana said. "What brings you to Tremé?" "Just visiting a friend," Miss Rose said with a gentle smile. "She's been feeling under the weather, so I brought her flowers to brighten her day. It's a common practice among my people back home in Haiti." She held up a finger. "I'm happy I ran into you." She reached into the burlap sack that kept draped over her shoulder and retrieved a large spray of lavender and bunches of marigold. "To decorate your supper club," Miss Rose said. "They are the colors of Mardi Gras. Purple for justice, gold for power, and the green leaves represent faith." "These are beautiful," Tiana said, as she took the flowers. Their coloring was so vivid they looked otherworldly. "Thank you so much, Miss Rose. I do wish you would let me pay for these." "Never," she shook her head. "A gift does not require payment." "Why don't you let me make you some beignets?" The other older woman put a hand to her stomach and shook her head. "I gotta watch my figure," she said with a laugh, although her figure remained a mystery since she was always dressed in layers of clothing. Even now that winter was melting into spring, Miss Rose still wore a heavy purple cloak and a flower-print scarf tied around her head. "Well, I should be heading back to my flower stall," she said. "No wise sayings today?" Tiana asked. Miss Rose loved sharing nuggets of wisdom she said were passed down from her mother. The woman's brow lifted. "Actually, I do have one for you. Ti bois à pouet, c'est li qui petit j'ai. The twig you don't see is the one that puts out your eye." Tiana peered at the flowers. Miss Rose had handed her. "Are there twigs in here?" "Be cautious," the woman said. "It means to always be aware of your surroundings." She smiled and patted Tiana on the arm. "Take care." Then she continued along the Rampart Street. Tiana gathered her flowers and vegetables she'd brought from her daddy's garden and continued toward the supper club. A familiar feeling of pride bubbled up inside her as the green facade of the building came into view. It might not be the palatial restaurant of her dreams, but it was everything she needed for the moment. For the next 6 months after her daddy returned, she continued working at her waitressing jobs. She still had the money she saved up to purchase the old sugar mill, but that the Fenner brothers had sold to another buyer behind her back, making the infuriating claim that someone of her background was unfit to run a restaurant. And she had diligently set aside every extra penny she earned, trusting that one day the opportunity she'd been waiting for would come along. It was fate that had brought her to the neighborhood of Tremé last fall, just as the weather was changing, and it was fate that had nudged her into taking a shortcut to Cross Department Store, where she'd been on her way to buy a new coat. She happened upon this building just as the banker was sticking a for sale sign in the window. Tiana had made him an offer on the spot and had raced to the bank to withdraw half of the down payment to show him that her money was good. Daddy had accompanied her to the same bank the next day, adding his servient pay from the money from the army to cover the other half of the down payment, so that she could keep saving for whatever came next. Tiana hadn't been able to contain her smile when she walked into Duke's Cafe and given Buford her 2 weeks' notice. She'd spent the next couple of months alongside her daddy renovating her new restaurant, and 3 months ago had welcomed their first guests, her mama, Charlotte, and Mr. Eli LaBeouf, to dine at T&J's supper club. Tiana pulled a copper key from her pocketbook and opened the door. She took a moment to bask in the joy she felt whenever she entered this place. After setting her bags on the table nearest to the door, she zipped around the dining room, removing the red carnation she received from Miss Rose a few days earlier from the simple blue vases at the center of each table. It struck Tiana as odd that the carnations had wilted so much overnight. She could have sworn each of these flowers had been healthy and fragrant when she wiped down the tables before locking up the restaurant yesterday. She replaced the modest carnations with the arrangements of lavender and marigold. Wow. Tiana plopped her hands on her hips, regarding the dining room with a smile. Miss Rose was right. The flowers instantly made the place more festive. Done with the front of the house, she grabbed the bag of vegetables and started for the kitchen. But before she made it to the swinging door, the sun that had managed to break through the haze shone directly on a scuffed spot on the floor, just underneath one of the paintings Miss Rose had given her. "Oh, no, you don't," Tiana said. She continued into the kitchen, set the bag down, and picked up an old rag. She headed straight for the mark, and it buffed it out of the floor. There would be none of that in her restaurant, thank you very much. She stood and straightened the slightly crooked picture frame that held Miss Rose's painting. Tiana was sure the flower monger had never set foot in the restaurant, yet the 4 pieces of artwork had gifted to T&J's matched the decor perfectly. Each featured a subject that was uniquely New Orleans and complemented the stunning mural her daddy had commissioned by an artist from the neighborhood. The mural, which depicted the rich Cajun and Creole cuisine they served, covered the entire back wall just behind the wooden dais where Louie and his bands played jazz music for the crowd. Tiana frowned. Had she reminded Louis about the music for tonight? "Hey, Tiana." She spun around. "Just the man I wanted to see." Louis smiled that big, almost frightening smile of his. "What are you grinning about?" "You said just the man you wanted to see. I still get a kick out of hearing that. Me, a man." He fiddled with his waistband. "Truth be told, I'm still getting used to it. Who knew pants could be so confining?" "Please, keep them on," Tiana said quickly. I know, Louie replied. "So, why did you want to see me?" Tiana stepped over to the stage. "I was wondering if we should go over the song list for tonight." "You don't need to worry yourself about that." He tapped the side of his head. "I've got it all up here. In fact, I came over to get the sheet music I left. Me and the guys were practicing over at Gerald's place." "Great," Tiana replied. "I'm thinking if word gets out that things are rockin' at T&J's Supper Club tonight, then people will decide that this is the place to celebrate their entire Mardi Gras weekend. And when they hear that Rudy Davis and the All-Stars will be here... Wait, Rudy Davis is still coming tomorrow night, right?" "They'll be here," Louie said. "There's just so much riding on this, Louis," she said, straightening a nearby tablecloth. "I'm counting on the money we bring in during the next 5 days to pay off a large portion of the loan on the building. I have to make sure Mardi Gras is a success. Nothing can go wrong." "Nothing will go wrong." Louie headed over and patted her on the shoulder. "I know you've had to deal with a lot this past year, but this is one thing you don't have to worry about. In fact, I asked Rudy if he and the band could come back next week. I've been thinking about home a lot lately. Maybe it's time for a visit." She paused, hearing the wistfulness in his voice and feeling a twinge of guilt. She hadn't considered that Louie would feel homesick, but why wouldn't he? He'd been away from his family for an entire year. Tiana just wasn't sure how Louie would be received back at the swamp now. She turned to look up at him and put a gentle hand on his arm. Sure. Why don't we talk about that after Mardi Gras?" "Yeah, good point. Let's focus on this coming weekend and make it the best thing that T&J's ever had. I know you can do it, Tiana. You've worked so hard not to." Louie was the only other person who knew about her deal with Facilier, but even Louie didn't know the entire story. He wasn't privy to all the details in the agreement that had made his dreams a reality. The bits about her father, for example, and the concoction she added to the gumbo. And yet their shared history had made him into something of a confidant this past year. At times, Tiana felt as if he was the only person she could turn to, the only one who would understand when she found herself faltering. "Thanks for being here, Louie," Tiana said. "For listening." He hunched his broad shoulders. "It's what I'm here for. Well, that and making your customers shake their ears." He did a little dance, then took off for the stage. "I need to get back to the guys. We're going to sound better than ever tonight. You mark my words, Tiana." "I believe you," she said with a laugh. "I'll see you in a few hours." The music taken care of, Tiana decided to focus on more pressing issues, like perfecting the jambalaya. Just as she re-entered the kitchen, there was a loud knock at the back door that led to the alley behind the restaurant. "I'll be right there," Tiana called. Relief rushed through her when she opened the door to find Mr. Salvaggio staring back at her. He wore his signature page boy hat. "Salve," Tiana explained in a greeting they always shared. "You're a lifesaver, Mr. Salvaggio. And you remain my favorite customer, Miss Tiana," the kind-faced Italian man said. He followed her inside, carrying a paper bag in each hand. "Here's your extra order of spaghetti, and here's a biscotti that my beautiful wife made for you. You must enjoy with a nice hot cup of coffee." He kissed his fingers. "Perfecto." "That sounds marvelous," Tiana said. "If you give me just a few minutes, I'll fry up your beignets. You know they're the best when they're hot out of the oil." She retrieved the already prepared beignet dough from their brand-new electric icebox and settled into listening to one of Mr. Salvaggio's stories. It had become a standing routine whenever he made a delivery. He would share memories from his childhood in Sicily while she made his beignets. Tiana wasn't sure she believed some of the tales Mr. Salvaggio spun, but they always made for a good laugh. She packed up his beignets and bade him goodbye. As he left through the back door, Mr. Salvaggio made Tiana promise that she would stop for a moment to enjoy the cookies his wife had sent over. Friendships like his were an unexpected bonus to owning her restaurant. The vendors she worked with viewed her with respect, as an equal. It was a far cry from the treatment she received from the Fenner brothers. Tiana's blood boiled like a pot of gumbo whenever her thoughts turned to that old sugar mill. Seeing all her hard work and sacrifice tossed aside like yesterday's trash had left her feeling powerless, and wishing on evening stars. Her eyes fell shut as waves of torment washed over her, but she opened them just as quickly. She didn't have time for wallowing. In a few hours, this restaurant would be full of hungry customers. Besides, none of that other stuff mattered anymore. She was doing just fine without that old sugar mill, and without the Fenner brothers or their bank loan. She didn't need to cast wishes on evening stars. She made her own dreams come true. And she certainly didn't need to rely on that no-good Dr. Facilier. Tiana hated to admit that. For the briefest second, she considered his offer to get her the restaurant when they'd made the deal last Mardi Gras. Thank goodness she quickly came to her senses. There was only one thing she relied on Facilier to provide. One thing she couldn't have possibly done herself. She walked over to the pantry and moved aside the jar of preserved green beans from last year's crop. Behind it stood a tiny vial of potion she agreed to add to her gumbo. She met with Facilier every couple of weeks, usually during their normal trip to the French market, and exchanged the empty vial for a new one. As long as he held up his end of their bargain, ensuring that her daddy stayed alive and the rest of her friends and family remained safe and well, this was all she would ever need from the Shadow Man. She leaned forward, peering at the vial. "Can't be," she said as she snatched it from the shelf. But yes, it was empty. "Oh, come on," she whispered. Guess she had to add a trip to the French Quarter to the list of everything else she had to do before tonight's dinner service. She grabbed her bag and headed out.